take the fabric and then we can't get out of those quickly.
Well, I've got here a number of Japanese books in Japanese, and this format here is what they call bunkobon, which is what I used to spend a lot of time buying when I was in Japan. And you can also see these have fabric book covers, but the fabric book covers you can buy separately. So you can actually take this off. And that's what the book looks like without it. And looks like I've spilt water or something on this one. Always spilling drinks on my books. But I particularly like this format because people talk about pocket books and so on, but these really are pocket books. And you can just slip them in like that. This particular one is by someone called Izumi Kyoka. These also have the same fabric book covers, as you can see. This one is Dazai Osamu, his first collection, which he called Bannen, which means final years, which, you know, obviously that would be what he calls his first collection, you know. And this is actually the Tao Te Ching, as you can see, I said I always spill drinks on my books, but it has the original Chinese, then classical Japanese translation of the Chinese, and then a modern Japanese translation, and plus notes. So it's a very thorough reference text, which I find finding quite interesting. I've been attempting to use this to translate from the Chinese via the Japanese. Yeah. Actually, if we go to the beginning, the very famous beginning of the Tao Te Ching, which is Dao Ke Dao, Fei Chang Dao, Ming Ke Ming, Fei Chang Ming, which is translated in various ways. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. And this is another very kind of Japanese format for a book, which is the box. You often get them with these boxes. And this is one of my favourite books, basically. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little picture of Kafu himself there with a huge gap-tooth grin. And the page layout here is quite interesting as well. It's almost like a newspaper layout in a way, because there's the top here, and then you read down there like that. Yeah. And it has a little monograph of Kafu there as well. But he apparently cut a very eccentric figure. And you can kind of see just here, he's carrying a briefcase. Now, when I was at Kyoto University, our teacher, Mori Sensei, one of our teachers, she told us that Kafu was an eccentric, and she said, no, I don't mean like a fake eccentric, like an exhibitionist or this kind of thing, not like the current Prime Minister, who people think's a bit odd. I mean a genuine eccentric. And she said one of the things that he used to do is he carried about his entire life savings in a little briefcase, and he'd go to a bar and get a drink, and he'd open the briefcase and take out some money and pay with it. So, I'm assuming that that's what that is there. Well, I could be wrong. And there's another. Slightly continuing the Japanese theme, but not entirely. The Lonely Doll by Dare Wright. Now, I'm not actually sure whether these were the first photo story books or not, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were. Certainly it's an innovative kind of idea. I can't even remember the date when The Lonely Doll came out, but it was like late 50s or early 60s. I have a feeling it was more 50s. 57, there you go. 1957 this was first published. And this is a recent Japanese edition of it. This is a story that it hasn't yet quite become popular in the way that some older children's books have, because some of it is considered politically incorrect, like there's a spanking scene, for instance. But it has amazing photography, and actually the more you look at the photography, the more you can see how much work has gone into it. It appears simple at first, but just little things like the way he's holding the newspaper here is quite amazing. And I don't know what it is exactly, but there's a kind of atmosphere to the whole thing. Now these books were not read to me as a child, actually, but I know them from my childhood. I discovered them by myself in a musty spare room, and I was going to bring some of the original copies with like crayon scribblings and that on them, but travelling to Stratford here, I thought that these copies are so old that they could easily disintegrate in my bag, so I thought I'd bring the newer, more robust copy, which I think that one thing that's interesting to me is that I think that she's very much a creative original, and often people just don't know what to do with people who are really original, and so people might think, well, isn't it just a children's story, or things like this, but you can never know where real originality is going to come through, or what channels it will come through, I think. So a very interesting artist, I think, Dare Wright. Now, a number of these books have got inscriptions, and this one has as well. John Eliot, another example of indulgence. I bought this relatively recently, and I got John to inscribe it here. He says, "To Quentin, with thanks for the literary excavation, nothing is lost but it sings." This was published in 1970-71 by Calder and Boyes. So this book feels to me like a very interesting little piece of history. And that's one thing that I very much like about physical books, you know. And there's a photograph here, slightly blurry black and white photograph of John apparently smoking a cigarette in a kind of like existential mode. And I can report that he hasn't changed at all. He looks exactly the same. Some 40 years later, more or less. I'm happy to say that this was his first published novel, and Quentin Press published his second, as I say, about 40 years later. So this to me is, as an object, part of a very interesting story. It's a kind of what's the word? Episodic is not the right word for it, but it starts off with little sketches of different scenarios, and they seem unconnected. There are many different sketches, but as you go further in, the connections become apparent. So this is an edition of the Annie Besant translation of the Bhagavad Gita, which I seem to be borrowing indefinitely from my father at the moment. And it's also a book, this actual physical copy, which appears in a story I wrote called Suicide Watch. So anyone who's read that story can now check and see how accurate my description of the physical object is. Now, one thing about my reading habits is that I'll use anything that's to hand for a bookmark, which means that often when I come back to a book and find a bookmark in it, it will remind me of the time when I was reading it. And the bookmark in this case is a ticket stub for something called Somewhere Out There, billed as An Evening of Clairvoyance and which is mediumship, I suppose, at the Astragan Lice Miners Welfare and Community Hall. And maybe I'm giving too much away, but the evening provided me with material which I used in another story, which I think will be published in an anthology, and the title of the story is The Gwilgi of the Lost Lanes, which is a kind of supernatural hocus-pocus story of doom and despair. Anyway, so a bookmark can tell a story as well. So, a dream is a wish your heart makes, which that must be a line from a song, I'm sure, but it's completely slipped my mind now what it's from. But anyway, it's a kind of celebrity memoir of Annette Funicello, who was, or is, in fact, the wholesome heartthrob of a former generation in America, a protege of Walt Disney, no less, and the star of the beach films, surfing genre films, even although apparently she couldn't surf, and the sea air made her hair go frizzy, apparently. But this was something that I picked up in a second-hand shop in Astraganlais. I was in that area for a couple of years and feeling quite isolated, and there wasn't an actual bookshop in Astraganlais, which I found strange, but of course it is becoming more and more common for there not to be bookshops in inhabited places. But anyway, there was more than one charity shop, and this was in one of those. And I thought, treasure amongst the junk. And so I picked it up, and one of the things that helped me along in my isolation in South Wales, I've found some of it quite fascinating, especially, lots of it, so I'm not going to recount the whole thing, but there was a friendship she had with a young man when she was also quite young, which I found interesting. It seemed like he was a kind of intelligent, bit of a joker, but he ended up, committing suicide. He attempted suicide one time, and she visited him, and apparently he promised her that he wouldn't do it again, but he did. And there's just something about that story. It seems like nobody really knows why he did it. He's just one of those people who had internal issues that nobody understands, But there are interesting little details about the story that you couldn't make up, really. Like, apparently he gave her a little jewellery box as a gift on one occasion, and inscribed on the inside of the jewellery box was, "I love you, Psycho," because Psycho was his pet name for her. I find that kind of quite fascinating, really, because there's so many kind of personal worlds like that just disappear, and we get little glimpses of them in things like that, but more of the world is unknown than known, really, and that's what this kind of thing sort of tells me somehow. I mean, here we are surrounded by books, and all of this is an attempt in some way just to fix some of that in place, but no one's read all of these books. Someone's read some of them. But even if somebody had read all of them, even if everybody had read all of them, my feeling is that would be a grain of sand in terms of what there is to be known somehow.